There is a very specific kind of silence that settles over the desert here in Scottsdale right around 2 in the morning. It is a heavy, absolute quiet. The kind of quiet that forces you to listen to the hum of your own refrigerator, the ticking of the cooling ducts, and the relentless machinery of your own thoughts. I spend a lot of time awake in those hours. I always have. When you spend 30 years operating as a high-level corporate sales executive, you condition your internal engine to run on a permanent, low-grade sense of emergency. You learn to sleep with one eye open, mentally reviewing quarterly projections, contract clauses, and flight schedules. You treat your body like a commercial piece of heavy machinery. You expect it to fire up on command, handle whatever load you put on it, and deliver the expected output without ever complaining. You assume the infrastructure is permanent. And then, one day, the machinery simply does not do what it has done flawlessly for 4 decades. I want to talk about something that happens to a lot of us as we cross into our 50s and 60s. It is something that almost no man will ever bring up voluntarily. Not at the golf course, not over a beer, and certainly not in the sterile, brightly lit confines of a doctor's examination room. We will talk about our bad knees, our rising blood pressure, and our failing eyesight, but we will protect this specific physical failure with a wall of absolute, terrified silence. I remember the exact night it happened to me. I was in my late 50s. It was during that chaotic, heavy period of my life when my first marriage was quietly falling apart under the weight of 1,000 unspoken resentments. I was running myself into the ground, taking every out-of-state meeting I could find, living on airport food and adrenaline, and dealing with a newly prescribed cocktail of blood pressure medications that my doctor insisted I needed if I wanted to survive the decade. I came home from a long trip, and for a brief moment the tension in the house seemed to lift. There was an attempt at connection. We found ourselves in the bedroom. The mechanics of the evening seemed to be operating normally. The physical response was there. The escalation was there. I felt the absolute, undeniable sensation of reaching the finish line. I felt the neurological rush, the specific peak that we all recognize. But when the moment passed and the system powered down, there was a completely jarring, terrifying realization. The physical output was entirely missing. I had experienced the complete sensation of the event, but the delivery system was entirely dry. It was what the medical community casually refers to as an empty orgasm. But sitting there in the dark, it did not feel like a medical term. It felt like a fundamental, catastrophic failure of my own identity. I felt a cold knot of pure worry form instantly in the pit of my stomach. I remember lying there, staring up at the shadows of the ceiling fan blades, spinning in the dark, and thinking with absolute certainty that my time as a functioning man had just officially expired. I assumed the manufacturing plant had simply shut its doors for good. I assumed the reserves were gone. I assumed that whatever vitality I had left had evaporated into the desert air. And because I had spent my entire adult life believing that a man's worth was directly tied to his physical output and his ability to produce, I felt an overwhelming wave of inadequacy and shame. I did exactly what men do when they are terrified of a mechanical failure they cannot fix. I hid it. I did not say a single word to my wife. I rolled over, pulled the heavy blanket up, and pretended the long flight had just exhausted me. And from that night forward, I began a systematic, quiet campaign of avoiding intimacy entirely. I would stay up late in my home office, staring at spreadsheets that did not need my attention, just to ensure she was asleep before I walked into the bedroom. I manufactured arguments over the tone of an email or the way the garage was organized, deliberately creating a thick wall of emotional distance so that the physical distance would seem justified. I was operating out of pure fear. I was terrified of being judged, terrified of feeling incomplete, and terrified of facing the reality that my plumbing was permanently broken. I carried that silent fear for a long time. It ate away at the foundation of my confidence. It wasn't until the relationship ended, not entirely because of this, but certainly accelerated by the massive emotional distance I had created, that I finally hit a wall hard enough to force myself to look at the actual mechanics of what was happening. I had to understand the infrastructure. If a piece of industrial equipment fails on a job site, you do not just stand there and feel ashamed of it. You pull out the schematic, you trace the lines, you figure out where the pressure dropped. I began reading. I bypassed the superficial fitness articles and started digging into the heavy, unglamorous reality of how the male reproductive system actually operates as it ages. What I discovered fundamentally shifted my entire perspective, and I realized how incredibly ignorant I had been about my own machinery. The first and most critical thing I had to understand was the difference between the electrical system and the plumbing. Most of our lives, we experience climax and the physical release as one single seamless event, so we assume they are the exact same thing. They are not. They are driven by entirely separate biological mechanisms. Climax is an electrical event. It is a neurological sensation of intense pleasure governed entirely by your brain and your nervous system. The release, the actual delivery of the fluid, is a mechanical event. It is the physical act of expelling the payload through the pipes. When you experience that dry event, it is absolutely vital to understand that your ability to feel pleasure remains completely intact because your wiring, your nerves, and your brain are still fully operational. The change is not in your manhood or your overall vitality. The change is strictly isolated to the mechanical delivery system. Part of the plumbing simply has a specific, identifiable reason for the reroute. I learned that the healthy system operates like a perfectly timed industrial manufacturing sequence. The main facility produces the primary component. The secondary facilities, the seminal vesicles and the prostate, contribute the heavy bulk of the fluid and the protective compounds. This final mixture is gathered in a holding tank. When the electrical signal hits the system, specific muscles contract in a powerful, highly synchronized sequence to propel the entire mixture forward and out the main pipeline. It is a rapid, high-pressure event that relies on delicate timing between the valves, the pumps, and the electrical grid. When the delivery fails to show up at the end of the line, it is almost always due to one of three specific mechanical failures. The first failure, and the one that I eventually realized was causing my own terrifying misfires, is an issue with the gatekeeper. The technical term is retrograde ejaculation, but in simple mechanical terms, it is a faulty check valve. Picture a small, highly specialized muscular valve located right at the exit of your bladder. Its entire job is to act as a security gate. During the moment of peak pressure, this valve is supposed to clamp down incredibly tight, sealing off the bladder completely. This ensures that the high-pressure fluid only has one possible route to take, forward and out the main pipeline. But if that valve becomes too relaxed, if the spring loses its tension, it fails to close the gate. Fluid under pressure will always take the path of least resistance. Instead of fighting its way down the long, narrow pipe, the fluid simply flows backward, taking the easy route directly into the open bladder. You still feel the intense electrical pleasure because the neurological signal fired perfectly. But because the payload was diverted backward into the holding tank, the external event feels entirely dry. I trace this back to the medications I was taking. I was on a heavy daily dose of blood pressure medication to keep my corporate stress from blowing out my heart. Those medications are specifically designed to relax blood vessels. They do a great job of lowering the pressure in the system, but the chemicals are not smart enough to only target the areas you want. They also systematically relax that tiny critical muscle at the bladder neck. I was sacrificing the tension of the gatekeeper to keep my heart running. This same mechanical failure is incredibly common for guys who have had to undergo procedures for an enlarged prostate. A buddy of mine, a guy who ran a logistics company over in Phoenix, went through a very successful prostate surgery a few years ago. He is a very proud, stoic guy. A few months after the surgery, we were sitting on my patio, and he looked completely defeated. He confessed to me that his system was running dry, and he felt like he had been hollowed out. I explained the gatekeeper concept to him. I told him that the surgeons had to alter that intersection to save his health, and it was purely a mechanical alteration, like a traffic light being permanently stuck open. When he finally understood that his desire and his ability to feel pleasure were completely unaffected, and that he was just experiencing a plumbing reroute, you could literally see the immense relief wash over his face. If you are experiencing this, a very common, non-alarming clue to look for is noticing that your urine is significantly cloudier right after intimacy, simply because the diverted fluid is now temporarily mixing with it. The second major cause of a dry run is a physical blockage in the supply lines. The medical term is duct obstruction. In this scenario, the manufacturing plants are working perfectly. The seminal vesicles and the surrounding glands are producing the fluid exactly as they always have. The inventory is sitting on the loading dock, but the small delivery pipes that transport the fluid to the main line are blocked. If the pipes are blocked, the delivery vehicle simply cannot pass. The total volume drastically decreases or disappears entirely, even though the production facility is running at full capacity. This usually does not happen overnight. It is often the result of long-term wear and tear on the infrastructure. It can be caused by the heavy scarring left behind by past infections, like a severe untreated case of prostatitis that you tried to ignore in your 40s. It is the biological equivalent of rust building up inside a copper pipe until the diameter is too narrow for anything to get through. In some rare cases, tiny calcifications, basically small stones, can form and physically block the narrow passage. If you are dealing with a blockage, the signs can be very subtle. You might notice a new, mild, heavy discomfort deep in the pelvis, right at the moment of climax, or if you look back objectively, you might realize that over a long period of time, the fluid has become progressively thicker and far less abundant. The good news about a blocked pipe is that you do not have to just live with it. A lot of these obstructions can be cleared out. Sometimes it just requires medication to finally shut down the chronic inflammation. Or in more severe cases, there are minimally invasive procedures that can act like a biological plumber to clear the line and restore the normal flow. The third cause is a fundamental failure of the supply chain itself. The fuel is simply running too low to keep the factory open. We are talking about severe hormonal factors, specifically a massive drop in testosterone. Testosterone is not just the chemical that makes you aggressive in a boardroom or helps you lift heavy things. It is the absolute primary, uncompromisable fuel for the entire male reproductive system. It regulates your baseline desire, but more importantly for this conversation, it is crucial for the optimal day-to-day function of the prostate and the seminal vesicles. Those two facilities contribute the vast bulk of the fluid. When your primary fuel levels drop significantly, the entire industrial system powers down to conserve energy. This is the one that sneaks up on you. Initially, you might just notice a slight, steady reduction in the volume of the fluid. You brush it off, but over time, as the tank runs closer to empty, this profound deficiency starts showing up across the entire grid. You notice a heavily decreased libido. The physical erections become far less firm and reliable. The general sensation of the climax itself feels muted, like listening to a song with the volume turned down low. And on a broader daily level, you find yourself fighting a heavy gray fatigue, unpredictable mood changes, and a quiet, steady loss of muscle mass. If the fuel is the problem, you are looking at a treatable hormonal deficiency, often called hypogonadism. It is an absolute mistake to just sit back, look at your thinning hair in the mirror, and chalk this up to just getting old. If you get a simple blood panel done, and it confirms that the primary tank is empty, carefully managed replacement therapy can often bring the factory back online. It does not just restore the fluid production, it brings back the energy, the raw desire, and the overall quality of your daily life. I learned all of this sitting alone at my desk, reading medical journals, and trying to make sense of my own failing machinery. The more I understood the logistics, the less shame I felt. I realized I was not a broken man. I was just a guy with a relaxed bladder valve caused by the medication keeping him alive. It was a trade-off. It was engineering. It was not a judgment on my soul. But I also learned that you cannot just play guessing games with your internal infrastructure. While a dry run is usually caused by one of these manageable mechanical issues, there are critical exceptions. Your body uses physical changes as a warning system, and sometimes those warnings mean there is smoke in the cabin. If this happens to you suddenly out of nowhere and with absolutely zero prior explanation or gradual decline, you need to pay immediate attention. If you ever notice pain accompanying the dry run, or if you see blood in the urine or the fluid, or if you are running a fever, or if you experience a sudden terrifying loss of physical sensation in the entire pelvic area, you do not wait. You do not try to tough it out. You do not wait to see if it fixes itself next week. These are heavy, blaring alarm bells that require an urgent evaluation by a professional. There are serious conditions that can interfere with the plumbing or the deeply embedded nerve signals. Uncontrolled, long-standing diabetes that you have ignored for years can literally rot the wiring that sends the electrical signals to the valves. Certain neurological diseases like Parkinson's can disrupt the timing of the entire orchestra, and in rare cases, specific urological cancers can grow and physically block the infrastructure. You have to be smart enough to know when to call in the heavy machinery. Do not let your pride kill you. When I finally met Alyssa, my second wife, I made a conscious decision that I was not going to carry the heavy, silent shame of my 50s into my 60s. Alyssa is 9 years younger than me, sharp, deeply observant, and she does not tolerate the kind of evasive corporate posturing I used to use to hide my insecurities. Early on, I knew I had to tell her the truth about how my system operated now. I was terrified. All my old programming told me that a woman would view a man with an altered delivery system as weak, as incomplete, as a damaged asset. But I sat her down on this exact patio, I looked her in the eye, and I explained the mechanics. I told her about the blood pressure medication. I told her about the relaxed valve. I explained that the electrical system was running hotter and better than ever, but the physical delivery was just taking a different route. She just looked at me, smiled, put her hand on my arm, and said, "Cole, I don't care about the plumbing. I care that you're here with me." The profound emotional toll this takes on us is entirely self-inflicted. We build our own prisons out of pride and silence. We equate the presence of a few milliliters of fluid with our entire value as a man. When the fluid disappears, we let feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, and deep frustration take root in our minds. We start avoiding the very intimacy that keeps us connected to our partners out of a paralyzing fear of being judged, or feeling like we are somehow less of a man. The absolute most important step you can take to break this destructive cycle is to acquire the information and then force yourself to communicate it. Understanding that you are experiencing a physiological, mechanical change and not a personal moral failure lifts an enormous, crushing weight off your chest. Your ability to feel intense pleasure, to have strong physical responses, and to enjoy a deep, grounding connection with your partner does not solely depend on the presence of that fluid. Your intimate life can and absolutely should remain a massive source of joy and strength as you age. You have to take back control of your own narrative. Do not ignore the changes in your system. Investigate them. If you notice a sudden or even a slow, progressive onset of a dry run, make the appointment. Go sit in the uncomfortable chair. A simple history conversation, a physical exam, and usually just a basic blood or urine test are all the mechanic needs to give you a clear, actionable diagnosis. Take responsibility for the underlying conditions that are rusting your pipes. If you are ignoring your diabetes, your soaring high blood pressure, or your terrible cholesterol, you are actively destroying the vascular and nerve health that controls this entire process. You cannot treat your body like a garbage disposal and expect it to run like a sports car. And most importantly, You have to break the silence. You have to talk openly with your partner. Tell her what you are feeling. Tell her what you are afraid of. Talking about the mechanical failure is incredibly liberating, and it clears the emotional static out of the room so you can actually find a solution together. Professional support, whether it means the doctor adjusts your medication so the valve tightens back up or prescribes a specific treatment to clear the line, is the absolute best tool you have for restoring your confidence. A dry run is not the end of your life as a man. It is not a verdict that your masculinity has been revoked. It is just a specific, decipherable signal from your machinery that deserves to be heard, respected, and investigated. Understanding the root cause, whether it is a relaxed valve, a blocked pipe, or a dry fuel tank, is the very first step to finding your peace of mind again. I have talked to so many men who thought their lives were over, who managed to regain their deep confidence, their raw vitality, and their joy in living simply by getting a clear diagnosis and putting an action plan in place. Do not measure your vitality by the output of a single mechanical process. Measure it by your overall health, your daily well-being, and your relentless ability to live fully and connect deeply with the people who actually matter. Do not let your own doubt or your stubborn, outdated shame stop you from seeking the answers you need. Acting intelligently and in time can completely transform your daily experience, restoring the quiet security and the intimate connection you absolutely deserve. Take care of your infrastructure. Do the maintenance. Have the hard conversations you have been putting off. The desert is going to keep getting hotter, and the only way we survive it is by making sure our systems are running as efficiently as possible. Keep your head up. We will talk again soon.